Hello, animators and artists. Kaitrin Snodgrass is a storyboard artist, revisionist, and a 2022 Toon Boom Ambassador who works in Burbank, California, and has contributed to action-packed productions like Harley Quinn, Invincible, and Blood of Zeus. We invited Kaitrin onto today's livestream to discuss her experiments working with 3D reference in Storyboard Pro, sharing resources for storyboard artists, and her career path into the industry. So, Kaitrin, welcome to the livestream.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So how would you describe your origin story? What led you to your career as a storyboard artist?
Well, I grew up loving to draw. I was a kid who was carrying a sketchbook with me wherever I went. And I think as soon as I found out, like, people work in animation and that's a thing you can do, I very single-mindedly focused on that for pretty much since junior high to high school. And I ended up coming out to LA to go to college and study animation. Originally, I think like a lot of people, I was like, I want to be a 2D animator. And then when I got to school, they're like, that's not a job anymore. It is still a job, but that's what they were telling us in 2007. So I tried, I tried a couple different things while I was in school. And then I took Jay Oliva's storyboarding class because he taught at my university. And I immediately fell in love with boarding. I was like, this is what I want to do. This is what I like. I love cinematography. I love acting. I love all of these parts of the process. And so once I figured that out, which was unfortunately like my junior year, so I was a little bit like, oh no, I need to like refocus my life a little bit. I ended up graduating and then proceeded to take classes at Concept Design Academy, Brainstorm School, other online places. And then basically I worked retail for like about 4-ish years. And then I was able to, through an internship I'd done at college at Cartoon Network, I was able to get a production assistant job. So I did that for about 1.5 years. And then finally I was able to start getting some freelance as a board artist. And so I was like, I don't want to do production anymore. I'm going to go into boarding. And so I've been boarding since like 2017, 2018. So that's kind of how I got into it.
So one through line I've noticed with your recent projects is you tend to work on productions that have a style that's either inspired by American comics or by anime. Were these the sorts of like projects that you wanted to work on from the beginning, or was this sort of an area that you had moved into based on like development of your skills?
Maybe a little bit of both, but it is where I definitely wanted to end up. I actually, I try not to have any regrets, but I definitely feel the age-old, like, don't draw anime, try to be as versatile as possible kind of mentality was something that like did start to affect me. I kind of thought I had to be this board artist who could like do everything. And the thing about action is it is really like technically more difficult. So that's why a lot of people who do action go all in on action. But I wanted to be the type of person, I was like, I just need to do everything. So I, for a very long time, tried to fit this niche that was not really something I wanted to do. Like, I love anime. I love comic book TV shows. Like, that's what I grew up watching. That's the sort of stuff I drew growing up. I drew while I was growing up. And then, so when I finally like crossed the threshold, right? Because it's like each time I would like get a goal, I was like, I have a new goal. So when I finally did start boarding, and my first show that I worked on was Central Park, which is, I really loved working on that show. It was a lot of fun, but
it's gorgeous.
Yeah, it's a super cool show, but it is like that Bob's Burgers style. And it also did help me a lot with learning perspective, which I am really glad I did that job. But it wasn't the type of stuff that I wanted to do, right? Like with shows like that, they have a very like fixed camera. Things are kind of like set in stone. So there isn't a ton of experimentation that you can do in them. And I realized very quickly, I was like, I'm happy I have a job, obviously, like, great. But I was like, this isn't what I want to do in my personal life. This isn't what I want to do for myself. And so I basically, while I was working, actually took a lot of classes from a lot of action board artists, so like Steve On, the Copeland brothers. I was taking classes from them and trying Chase Connolly. And so I kept pushing myself more towards the action direction, like while I was still working as a board artist. And then I had been a board artist for like 4-ish years, I think. And then when I heard Invincible was hiring, I actually reached out to the supervising director through LinkedIn and was basically like, hey, I am really interested in working on this show. I don't have a ton of action experience, but that's what I want to do. So I'd be interested if you have any like revisionist positions that open up. And at the time they didn't. We actually like hopped on a call and like got to chit chat. And he was basically like, we don't have any positions, but I'll put you on my like B list in case somebody like it doesn't work out or whatever. And what ended up happening, actually, I was on the phone, got on a Discord call with my friend Kayla, and she had worked on the first season, and they had asked her to come back. And she was actually, I think, working on X-Men at the time. And she was like, oh, I'm on X-Men, so I can't come back. And so literally she sent the email while I was like talking to her, and then they emailed me right away. And I was like, oh my God. So that was, and it was great too, because I feel like Invincible, being a revisionist on that show, it kind of did feel like being in action boarding school. I'm getting paid to learn how to do all this cool stuff that I've been wanting to do for the last however many years. So it was a really great experience.
One of the things I really liked about the recent season of Invincible was they had a scene. It was like a reference to the comics, where they went to the Comic-Con and they were talking about like the comics process, whereas in like the adaptation, they're talking about the animation process, and they're talking about things that you do on a show when there's, you know, a limited budget, sort of have like a panning background, showing characters talking from behind so you don't have to animate the mouth, which I just thought was really kind of clever and interesting, and like draws your attention to like the animation process. Just really, really interesting.
Yeah,
so,
I was gonna say that was boarded by Tonico Pantoja. By the way, if people want to go find he posted a couple versions of it, actually.
It's excellent. So you recently shared, the reason why we're having you on this stream is you recently shared a short project where you created an animatic, partly by importing a pre-rendered Previs scene into Storyboard Pro. Can you tell us a little bit about that scene and what led you to experiment with 3D previs?
Yeah. So the scene in particular, I like to do these little short projects, and this is a sound from TikTok. Basically, it's just a fun little like moment. Like I think before, you know, just like, sort of like setting up a fight. And I had seen the sound going around on TikTok, and I was like, because there's this musical, like he's like, I can't kill you, but my buddy can. And then there's this musical like bong sound, and in my head when I kept hearing it, I was like, oh, I have this idea for this shot. So I was like, I'll make it. And then I decided to play with Blender a little bit more because while working on Invincible and Blood of Zeus in particular, we use Blender to set up they give you the Blender scene. So you have like basically the entire background. They have a 3D background team, and they usually give you a couple 3D, like sometimes they'll render, like on Invincible, we have a 3D Mark. He's like our reference point. So we'll like, even though not every character is shaped like Mark, you'll use it to like block out a scene sometimes with all these marks to like figure out the scale of everything, because usually if you know how tall he is, you know how tall the other characters are.
You know that like Samson is like 1.5 marks tall, right?
yeah, exactly. It's like I know, like, because we have like the lineup sheet and everything, so you can kind of base it off of that. And so we had started, that was something we started doing in that show. And one thing I wanted to play with, actually, and this is actually really funny because I think last time I did a talk with you guys gave me some like assets to do like the storyboarding, like the Toon Boom like tutorial. And there was this 3D section. And one of the things that I noticed that you guys had shown in that demo was exporting like a 3D MOV file and then import. And I was like, oh, this is brilliant, because I have played in actually a previous animatic that I did. I actually did play with importing 3D assets into Storyboard Pro. And I do not have a powerful enough machine to not like kill my file when I do that. So I'm glad I did it because it was like a good learning experience. But I was like, every time I clicked on that scene, I had to like wait 10 minutes before I could like do anything because it would like beach ball. So I was like, the MOV file is like genius. So that's what I did here. Actually go back a little bit. So this is actually, if I turn off these layers, turn on this layer, and then I'll turn off, I guess I can't turn off this whole layer, but actually, you know what I can do? I can do this. Sorry, move track up. But as you can see here, the 3D there, let's make these less opaque. There you go. But I exported this, I rendered this out of Blender to be like my reference. And then I did it again. I did it twice with the reference characters in there. And then I did a version where I took them out so that I could have, I could draw over it and have like the characters in the shot and add a tween to them. And it's been something I've been really wanting to play with, because I've seen, you know, there are some ways that we can use 3D to make like these really cool moments and like have these dynamic, you know, these dynamic shots that like move in 3D space. And I know like with some shows that like, not every show can do it. Obviously it's 2D because it's really expensive to do these kind of shots, but some, you know, I know there are some studios that like implement 3D and 2D, and they'll like toon shade the backgrounds, and they'll do a style so that they can like, you know, kind of cheat and it'll still look 2D even though it's 3D. And so that's something that I wanted to try playing with, because I don't know, I'm always thinking of like fun and interesting ways to like come up with stuff. And also I'm very much a like work smarter, not harder person. So using 3D like really appeals to me in that aspect. So
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of those things, is that there are certain things that are easy to do in 2D and certain things that are hard to do. You know, like there's the old cliche of the first time like a writer who writes for like live action writes for like a 2D show. They'll say something like, in animation, we can do everything. We can do anything. We have an unlimited special effects budget. And it's like, for some things that's true, right? Like you can put a character and put them in space. But if you want to have like the camera track with the character while they're walking forwards, that's not an easy thing to do in 2D. Or if you want to have like a big crowd shot, right? Like you have to have all those incidental characters. Like there are things that are challenging for productions or expensive.
yeah.
And you know, having a 3D background or scene is one of those things that can take some of that difficulty and just kind of, you know, sidestep it. One thing that I really noticed about the scene that you shared is that if you look at the scene with just the previs and you look at the scene with your boards, you're not rotoscoping. Like these characters are different. So do you want to talk a little bit about like your sort of approach to using previs assets and like what they inform and what you use and what you ignore?
Yeah. So basically so this was just like I just downloaded like a generic male shape for this scene, because I just figured, you know, I just want to see like how it's going to look blocked out. But the characters that I designed, which I do, where did I put them? I don't know where they are right now. Oh, they're here. The characters that I designed, like one is more buff than the other. Like they don't look exactly like that character. And I also think too, with 3D, like if you trace over a 3D model, it'll look like you traced over a 3D model. I think unless you know, it's not going to look quite right in 2D, like when you draw it. So I mainly just use them to kind of get a feel for where everyone would be and kind of how I would shoot this before I went into Storyboard Pro. And so that was kind of my thinking for this, is like I would plan out the blocking and figure out where everyone was. And then once I got there, I could like change it up a little bit. And I'm still in the process of working on the sequence. So there's already stuff too that I'm like probably going to change as I'm going and like kind of move people in different areas. And so it's a nice reference tool to like have and to be able to visualize like the overall like vibe that we're going for. But I don't want to get stuck in a situation where I'm like, oh, I have to do it exactly like this. I have to make this character look exactly like this, because I think, you know, and I've done stuff like that before. I've gotten stuck in that mindset before. I feel like you end up with much stiffer drawings, and also it feels a little bit like less lifelike. So that's kind of why use it purely as a reference, because I think that's, you know, that's what's helpful about it, is I can, you know, get the visualization very quickly.
Yeah. So would you say that like you often use 3D objects, scenes, or references on industry productions? And if so, like, which of those do you find to be like the most useful?
Yeah. So we did for the last 3 shows I worked on. So all Blood of Zeus, Harley Quinn, and Invincible all used 3D assets. At WB, they're still using SketchUp, so it's a little bit different. Blender, I think, is a lot more artist friendly, and it really helps. It helps for a lot of reasons, and this is like also kind of like a pipeline thing. But you know, knowing, even if you have a 2D show and it's not in 3D, having a consistent like location, especially because like so many people work on these episodes, and so you might all have a scene like on Invincible, like the Grayson's house is like a model that we use a lot, you know, and making sure that, you know, everything looks the same. There's actually, this is kind of funny because I think there was an interview with Robert Kirkman, and he joked about the fact that like their house makes no sense in the comics. Like the doors, there are random doors and windows that like appear in random places, and it's not really consistent, and you don't really notice when you're reading the comic. I notice now because they pointed it out, but like I didn't notice when I was reading it. But for animation,
like Simpsons house.
Yeah, like it just doesn't make always sense. It's just like the way it is. But like for animation, like especially one that's more grounded in reality, if like there was randomly a door there that hadn't been there before, like you would notice, right? So we are able to keep consistency throughout the episodes, especially because there are locations that like we go back to a lot, and you might have multiple artists working on that episode, and you want to make sure it stays consistent. And also too, I think it just makes it easier for our BG team, because let's say, because things change during production, but like if you know, okay, these are the shots that are pretty much, we might change acting, there might be some like small changes, but we know like these shots are the same. You can start handing out to the BG paint team, hey, this isn't going to change, so like you can start painting this background. So it kind of helps like make it smoother, like the pipeline smoother, and helps with our consistency throughout these sequences. It's also been nice too, because I guess you know, we have a lot of color key like established color keys, because it is like a show that's been going on for a while now, and so I think they have found like a kind of groove in working with this sort of pipeline. And I think yeah, I think it just like helps everyone overall. And I think it also helps you to like not second guess stuff as well, because sometimes like, you know, especially when you're trying to make something look more realistic, you might like draw a background and put a character, and then you're sitting there going like, wait a minute, is this the right size? And then you like start doing the measuring and all that stuff, and like it can take a while. The nice thing about having like, you know, a Blender set up and like being able to like know your shot and like figure it out right away is like, it takes out all that guesswork, and you can just focus on the drawing and the acting and, you know, get it out a lot faster.
Do you find that like with having a like a 3D scene to sort of look at and reference, is it almost like you get to sort of be like the director of photography, you know, sort of scouting a location and deciding like, oh yeah, this would be a great angle to set up the the shot?
Yeah, I really love that. Usually what I'll do, because I really also want to emphasize like people watching, like I really think 3D should be used as a tool and not a crutch. And it shouldn't be a replacement for like knowing perspective or knowing how to draw backgrounds. Like that's stuff you should still know how to do. But I think knowing it can help enhance your skill set. Usually what I'll do, especially for something like this, so I kind of had the idea. So I had kind of like quickly like come up with the idea in my head of like how this would be, and like thumbnailed it out. And then I found the original version of this, I didn't have like a 2-story tavern. It was just like in my head, it was just like a bunch of dudes around them. What happened was I was on Sketchfab, is the website that I use to find Blender backgrounds. I found this model, and I was like, there's a 2-story, like this could be fun to play with in the shots. So then I got like more ideas. And then when I set up all my characters, that was like, this shot in particular was one that I came up with, because I was like, I was originally going to have them all on the ground floor. And then I was like, what if I make the main bad guy they're talking to like on the top floor? So it's like this nice like power dynamic of like the boss of the villain gang is like, he's at the top. The boss is
big, they're small.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, so then I had like all these other ideas that came about once I had like a visual like reference to look at, and it sort of like exploded my ideas. So I think it's a good idea personally to kind of, I actually just took Danny Araya's boarding class, and he also uses 3D in his work as well. And he said what he likes to do is he likes to come up with a shot list, before he even gets into the 3D, because then you kind of have an idea before you even get into it. And then I think it makes it go much faster, because I will say, if you're going into it without a plan, and I've done that, like I'm not going to lie and say I haven't done that. I've gone into things without a plan before. Without a plan, I tend to kind of just like move the camera around, and I'm like not really sure like what shots I'm going to go with. So I think if you kind of go into it, you kind of already mapped out your plan. It makes it a lot easier to like basically be your own DP and like figure out like where it's all going to go.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting part of storyboarding that has like nothing to do with drawing, where you're sort of looking at like the language of cinematography and filmmaking and figuring out like what is something that would be compelling just in terms of like the shots, in terms of in terms of like where things are on screen.
Mm-hmm.
So that's talking about like 3D scenes. Talking about like 3D references for characters on the productions that you work on, like how is that? Why is it useful to be able to see like a figure in 3D?
Scale is super important. And I will say for Invincible, we just had Mark. So, I think I just mentioned that earlier. So, but
you have Mark as a unit of measurement.
Yeah, Mark is our unit of measurement. I did actually find the Fortnite model though on the server one day, and I was really confused. And then like months later, he came out on Fortnite, and I was like, that's what I saw. Because I was like, why is he toon shaded? Because our Mark is grayscale. It helps you with the scale more than anything else. And then on the Harley, actually, we didn't actually have 3D models of Harley and Ivy. What we had were like cardboard cutouts, which also I think works just as well as long as it's the right size. Because some productions, they don't want to like model a whole character. So as long as you just have like, even if it was like a pillar or like anything that's just like the size of that character, that's all you really need. You just need to see it like the perspective of like, oh, okay, like that is how tall this person is. That is what the shot would look like, And I've seen too, especially if people like if a character isn't, because like the thing about the model is it's just like, it's like T-posing almost, right? So it's not necessarily like always the best reference, especially if a character is like doing something with their body. Or so I've seen people like use like just a square, like if they're sitting or something, just to like map it out. So it's mainly I think just for scale, and especially too like with Blender and being able to move the camera around in Blender and like figure out your shots that way. It can be nice too, because if you kind of have something there, like if you're trying to come up with a shot where maybe you're obscuring an object in the background, or you want to have something there to kind of like see like, okay, if I do this, it'll give this effect. So it can be really useful that way. And also I think sometimes because I have used SketchUp before, and SketchUp, it is harder to have like a character in there. Sometimes you'll screenshot it, you'll find the shot, and then you'll bring it in, and then you start drawing the character, and you'll realize like once the characters are in there, like it isn't what you thought it would look like. So that's why I think it's really useful to have it, because it kind of like, I don't want to have to keep going back and like screenshotting it again, because I'm like, oh, this was the wrong angle. Like I need to bring the camera down. I can do that in Blender before I even get to Storyboard Pro.
I think one other use case where having like 3D objects or previs is really helpful is when you have like cars, vehicles, complex machines that need to be consistent, because that can be very helpful to have that, especially if the perspective changes.
Yeah, and I will say I haven't had too many car scenes lately, but I will say that is something that because I try not to import 3D stuff into a Storyboard profile because it will slow it down. My exception is sometimes I will import cars because it's easier than just screenshotting the car. I can just import the car object in, and once I've drawn everything else, I'm like, I'll just put the car and have it drive on the road, and that like makes it a lot easier than than trying to screenshot it and then like erase everything around it.
So this scene in particular was a scene that you had rendered from 3D into a movie and then imported into Storyboard Pro. Were there any unexpected challenges with storyboarding using those types of previs assets where you previously rendered it?
I mean, the challenge, and it's still something that I'm working on right now, because I'm still going to change probably some of the acting on here, but it's making sure, like, I'll turn this on so you can see it better, but making sure that this like makes sense, I guess, because one thing with like a motion layer, when you're doing it across multiple panels, sometimes like if there's acting or something happening, it is sometimes a struggle because it doesn't always do it exactly the way you want it to, and you have to kind of go in and like finagle it to get it to move the way you want. And so that has been my I guess my biggest like hurdle with the sequence. And I'm probably gonna have to go back into, like, I'm actually working on some other parts of it right now because I know I'm gonna have to go back into this scene and change a couple of things, because I kind of want to, you know, mess with some acting, and I haven't started with my background characters yet because I know it's gonna be, because I want them to react, so I don't want them just standing there. I want them to like look. So I'm gonna have to figure out how to like move them in the space, because the camera move is its own mob file and it's doing its own thing. So now I have to figure out how these 2D objects are going to move within that. So it's sort of just like figuring all that out and like figuring out what looks right. And it's a little bit technologically, like it just kind of like, it's a little tedious. But it is like way faster than if I was like animating out the background. And also too, I think if I was working on a show, right, we would probably like toon shade this 3D element to like match the style of the show, to like just do a 3D move with it. And that's something that I think Invincible does do. Sometimes you can, and I think that it's pretty good at it, because sometimes you don't always notice, especially in the last season, because I think they got a lot better at like hiding it. I think season 1 you can tell a lot more, but they got better at hiding when we would do those 3D moves and like cell shade the background. And I will say for X-Men 97, I didn't work on it, but I have friends that did, and I know they're using a combination of 2D and 3D, and you can't tell sometimes. Like it went like, unless you know, I mean, you can tell because it's like crazy, but you can't tell that it's like 3D in the sense that they're just.
It doesn't look like you've jumped into like a PlayStation 2 game or something.
Right, exactly, and that's kind of like the goal. And I think as this technology gets better, I think it's something that we're going to be able to do more of, because I mean, it is very expensive to do those 3D shots on a lot of projects, but I think the hope is that as time is going on, the technology to do the 3D stuff is getting less expensive, hopefully, so that we can do more of it, because I think it is really fun, and I think it kind of opens the door to like more interesting and dynamic ways of playing with the camera in a 2D space.
Yeah, I know another like issue, and this might not come up as much in boards, but when you have like 3D objects and 2D assets and characters, you can run into like weird Z depth issues where it's not always clear, like how do you get like a 2D thing to cut a 3D thing, or vice versa, in a way that like works, because like you have to put like the 2D character in 3D space, but then like the polygon might not interact where you want it to. There are all these like weird little edge cases that can drive people crazy.
Yeah, and I mostly used 3D for 2D projects, because it's been very helpful, because I don't have to worry about that sort of stuff as much, which is nice, because I am not the most 3D efficient person. Like I've gotten more into it now because I'm like, oh my gosh, I found like this tool that I can use it for, and I'm really excited to use it. But because I'm not like worried about like a model functioning, I guess, if I did model something myself, I'm like, it looks good enough, or it's like a good enough reference for what I'm doing, that I don't need to stress too much about that stuff. So I leave that to the 3D people.
We've got a couple questions in the chat that I just wanted to take some time to go through. A user by the name of Mango Walker, I'm guessing this is on Twitch, is asking, would you recommend having experience in 3D modeling in Blender if you're using it as reference?
I don't have 3D modeling experience in Blender, so I don't think you need it. But I think it would help I took a class from CGMA that was like a intro to Blender for like 2D artists. And I know there's a bunch of Blender tutorials. I would say maybe do a couple of like tutorials online of the basics, just because it'll teach you the interface and like how to use it. But I wouldn't stress too much about like being a super efficient modeler. It does help to like, because I don't say I can model because I can't. I'm like I don't really know how to model, but I actually do know how to do like a couple of things where like if something isn't working or I need to delete something or I know I want to cut something in half, like I know how to do that. So I'm not like advanced or anything, but I know like the basic interface and the tools. So I would say that's the most important thing. There's a lot of amazing 3D Blender artists out there who've been posting their work their sets and their things that you free to use on Sketchfab. So it's free to use on Sketchfab, like you can download it. And there are a few people, these ones that I have here were all free to use, but a couple of times I've some people, they ask for like $5 or something, which I'm like, that's fine. Like I'm happy to like pay someone because they made this cool thing and I can use it. Some companies, like the 3D sets are like insanely expensive, but they're also like beautifully rendered and have a bunch of like, I don't know, like it's already like got the lighting and like everything and export. It's already ready to go for like a production. So those ones I'm not too worried about using. I just use like the basics and stuff.
Yeah. I also think that whenever in a position where like you're an artist and you can pay other artists, it feels good. We've got another question in the chat. This is from Animate Sam, who's asking if you're a board artist or revisionist and you have 3D as part of your skills, is that something that can affect your wage?
Can it affect your wage? Not really. We have a wage scale in the animation industry. So if you go on our website, on the Animation Guild's website, this is for union jobs. Obviously, it's not going to be the same everywhere, but it kind of gives you an idea of like the range. So if you go on the website, you can see the like floor, like the bottom wage you can get paid for a certain job. And so you can negotiate a higher rate, but they might not give it to you.
Yeah, and it's also worth looking at the Animation Guild's website. That is animationguild.org. Tons of great resources for artists and animators. It is American-based, so if you're coming to this chat from Canada or the UK or Australia or anywhere else where animation is made, you might not be able to directly apply those resources, but it is always good to have the reference. All right. Was there anything that you learned from this process? Because like this was an exercise that you did to share online and sharpen your skills. What do you feel that this did to help you advance your skills?
I think the main thing it did is it helps me. I mean, it's really like a speed thing. One thing that I'm always looking, not only improving my skills as a draftsman, but I'm always looking to improve my speed because, they always say there's like the three things that like they want a board artist to be is like good, nice, and fast, right? So I'm always kind of like working on, I think I'm pretty nice. And I'm so good and fast are like the two things that I'm always kind of like going back and forth on working on. So part of this was an exercise to see like how I could set up a scene in Blender and how quickly I could figure it out. And to be honest, like it honestly didn't take me that long. I've used Blender. I think also too, I came back to this after having been working with Blender in a professional setting. So one thing that I've been doing a lot lately is because I'm not working right now, I am taking the things that I learned off of the shows that I worked on and trying to apply them to my personal work to see, one, if I can get better for like a future job, but two, to see how far I've come since before I started working. Because even the most recent animatic project that I shared, it's a fight scene that's pinned on my page, but I actually started that before I was working on Invincible, and then after Invincible, I like finished it up and posted it online. And so now I'm at this point where I'm like, okay, I want to take all of these things that I've learned and implement them. And using Blender has been something that's been like so useful. And I think it's something that I want to continue to do because it's, I don't know, it's just really fun to play with. It's kind of like playing a video game. Like once you get the scene set up and you can like move the camera around, you're like, oh, I can like figure out all these cool shots.
So we discussed earlier that you've worked on some really awesome series, Harley Quinn, Invincible, Blood of Zeus. What kinds of skills should artists focus on if they want to storyboard for those kinds of action-focused productions?
I would say draftsmanship and anatomy and perspective. Like you need to have extremely, extremely strong draftsmanship for those shows. And it's, and being fast also is a huge help. They can't really tell when they're looking at your portfolio, your speed though. So, and I do say too, like make sure you can show in your portfolio that you can draw backgrounds and you do understand perspective as well, because I've started playing with 3D now as a professional who's already been working in the industry for a while. I say this is kind of like a warning because I know actually Jay Leva, my teacher, he said to his students, like, don't use it until you know perspective, because I think one worry is that like if people start using it before they understand perspective, they won't be able to you know, like you don't always have a background, right? Like it's like a lot of the times, a couple of shows that I've worked on, I've been really lucky that they have had the background, but I've also worked mostly on shows that don't have 3D sets and I've had to do it all on my own. So it's important to know those skills, but oh, sorry. Yeah, that's basically the answer.
And do you have any advice for storyboard artists who are interested in working with 3D assets, aside from what you've already mentioned?
Yeah, I would say the great thing about Blender is it's free, so I would download it and start playing with it. And honestly, if you just Google like how to use Blender, you can start like watching some tutorials and following along. It does have a bit of a steep learning curve, I will say. It's a little, it is a little complicated if you've never like used anything like it before, which is why I think I took a really long time to come around to it, because I was really resistant to the interface. But then once I started playing with it, I realized like for what I needed, it wasn't that hard to figure out. And then the other thing too, I will say that's really nice is there is a lot of like community, like you can like, if you Google something, you can find answers in forums and things like that. Usually if something isn't working the way you want, there's usually like other artists who use it you can reach out to and ask them for help. I have a couple other friends who are way more into Blender than I am that I will hit up when I'm like, hey, I'm having this problem. Can you show me how to do this? So I think there's a lot of resources out there to help you. So the main thing I would say is just download it and start playing with it. And then try to make something, you know. I think the best, you know, learn by doing. I think it's like the best thing I can say, because I really didn't go into like Blender with like a plan or a curriculum for myself. I kind of was just like, I want to see if I can start using it in my own work, because I was forced to do so with my job.
So one thing that I noticed about the stuff that you post on social media is that you share a lot of advice for aspiring storyboard artists and animation students. What interests you about sharing your behind-the-scenes process with an audience?
So I've been really fortunate. I have a lot of friends who like broke in before me, who have been very successful in their careers. And they've always given me advice. I have, and I've just been really like, I guess, blessed with like lots of really amazing people within this community. And so one thing that's been kind of important to me is I always want to like pay that forward. And I also made a lot of mistakes. My career into the industry was not necessarily linear. And I also didn't, I don't want to say I took bad advice, but I kind of like, I took all advice, which is not always the best. Like somebody would say, do something, and I would do it. like all in, and then somebody would give me conflating advice and I'd be like, oh, okay. And then I'd like do it, you know. So I think I wanted to start giving like advice online specifically because I really want to impart to people that there isn't like one right way to do this. And it's a good idea to trust your own intuition, because what may have worked for someone else might not work for you. And I also think it's good to find people who kind of like vibe with your way of thinking. And so if somebody kind of like thinks about the world and thinks about art the way I do, they might see what I say and really resonate with it, and it'll help them. But I've gotten advice from people who, you know, I'm friends with, and they're like really great people, but the way that they approach things is different than how I approach things. And so the advice they've given me, whilst like well-meaning and I super appreciate it, it wasn't necessarily super helpful because the way they approach things is different than me. And that's like,
I think one of the really important things when you give someone advice is try to understand what they're trying to do.
yeah,
Because that's a big part in whether or not your advice will be relevant.
yeah, exactly. So, and also like, because it was COVID, I think a lot of it started during COVID, and it kind of happened kind of like organically, a little bit, because I was just on TikTok and I started posting some like, you know, of my animatics from like work. And then people were like, how do you do this? And I'm like, well, this is how.
Yeah, no, we started this channel during the COVID pandemic because we couldn't go to animation festivals, and we were just missing that connection with artists and animators. And it was just a really being able to like connect with people is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun. I also just really like teaching. I don't know. I enjoy doing it. I like talking about the craft. And I also feel like maybe this is selfish a little bit, but they say like the more you explain something, like the better it gets in your own brain. So I'm like, it's like I'm studying too while I'm explaining something.
That's actually an excellent point. And I also think like being a teacher and like helping people, talking about your work and being able to like communicate like visually on a page to someone else like what you're doing, that's a skill, and that is a skill that can only help you on productions. We got a question in the chat that I think is interesting. And so given what you said about don't follow everybody's advice, look for people who you kind of have things in common with or are doing things that like you want to be able to do. What do you think would be important to put in a portfolio if you're trying to work on the productions that you're trying to work on? And what are sort of the things that you should maybe avoid putting in a portfolio?
Honestly, I think you should make stuff that you really want to make, because for so long, I tried to make a portfolio that I thought recruiters would want. I had a board that I did. I actually found it recently and I was like, oh my God, this is so bad. But it was like a personal story of like from my childhood. And I tried to do it in like the style of like Gravity Falls. And it is so bad. And I was just like, why did I do this? Because I mean, I love Gravity Falls. I don't want to work on Gravity Falls. I have no desire to work on Gravity Falls. But the reason I did it is because somebody was like, well, Gravity Falls is popular, so do a Gravity Falls style board. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll do this little story from like when I was a kid. And I got bullied this one time, so like I'll do that, right? And it's so funny because like I really feel like I've been online like posting my art for like a really, really long time. But I only started to get noticed for my art as soon as I said, I don't really care anymore. I'm just going to draw what I want. And then all of a sudden people were like, oh my God, I love your stuff. And I was just like, wait, this whole time I should have just been drawing what I wanted to draw instead of drawing what I think people wanted me to draw. Because I think, one, if you're doing stuff that you love, you're going to do more of it. And you're going to find that you want to do more of it because it's something you want to do. So like if you want to do like anime action stuff, Legend of Korra type vibes, like go study like Kihon Ryu's boards and like do that, like go all in, like do that stuff. If you want to do like cutesy preschool stuff and you really like that, like you want to work on Puppy Dog Pals, then do funny little shorts about your pets. You know what I mean? Like whatever it is that you like, the shows that exist that you want to work on, or maybe even shows that maybe aren't popular right now. Like this is like kind of like a funny one to mention, but like if you were obsessed with Invader Zim as a kid and you like musicals, start boarding stuff for that because Hazbin Hotel could hire you. Like you don't know what could happen, right? So I think the main thing people want to see is your passion, like what you love doing, and always leave them wanting more. Make portfolio pieces. I think there's people like, oh, it has to have a beginning, middle, and end. And that is like kind of true. You want to do like a scene that makes sense all on its own. But if you end something on a cliffhanger, or like something is about to happen, or it's like not necessarily a complete story, but it's an engaging story, and they're like, wait, what happens next? I want to know. Like, that is going to be the kind of stuff that gets people interested in your work. So yeah, I would just say, like, do what you love and like go all in on it, and do it like 110%, and like follow your bliss a little bit. Because I will say, like, sometimes I like to experiment and try and draw in other styles and do another type of board that isn't maybe necessarily like my normal like niche that I like. And that's just because like it's fun to play and experiment. So if one day you're like, well, I do really want to do a project that's like kind of outside my comfort zone and something completely different, go for it. You know, just follow like what is inspiring you in that moment.
Yeah, I feel like the one universal thing with having a reel is keep it maybe short.
Yeah.
Don't make
Don't do
it
it too long.
yeah. More than 3 minutes is probably too long. Minute and a half is probably a good amount.
Yeah, and I feel like for boards, I would say if you're gonna make it animatic, about a minute is a pretty good rule. When TikTok had like the time limit, so now that they've like opened it up, but when they did have like the time limit, I used to say like to my students, I was like, if you could post it on TikTok, like a minute long. I guess YouTube Shorts is a minute still, so like, you know, it has to be something that is short and engaging. And I would say for boards too, if you're doing, I usually say like have about 3 samples. Some people like to follow the like have a comedy scene, a drama scene, action scene. But you know, I would just say do 3 scenes that are like something you like doing. Usually, what I do is I on my website I like to like cycle things out. So like if I do something new, I'll take something off. So there's not like too many, because sometimes if they look at your page and there's like a billion things, they're gonna be like, oh, this is too much.
Every animation school exercise you've ever done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Probably not what you want to have. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that
every
makes
figure
sense.
drawing. It's like.
All right. Let's see. Oh, one more. Okay. We have a question of like, where did you learn to implement like 3D into your projects in Storyboard Pro? Like, what did you look at as resources when you were trying to figure that out?
This probably is not going to be super helpful. It was work. So specifically, one of my teammates on Invincible had worked with 3D. So he kind of gave us a little demo. I don't think he wanted to. He was sort of like made to because he knew how. And then my friend Kelly Cow, she gave me like some PDFs that had like hotkeys and stuff in them, like for reference and use. So I did, you know, like I mentioned, I did take a CGMA class just to like familiarize myself. But once it was, I was using it for boarding specifically. That was literally, it was literally just through work and trial and error and asking my coworkers. And I will say too, if you end up in a situation where like you end up on a show and they've hired you, and then there's a piece of technology that you're using that you haven't used before, like there will be people there, like ask for help. Like, don't be afraid to ask for help and say like, I don't know how to do this thing. No one is going to be like, oh, how come you don't know how to do this thing? Like, no one is going to say that to you, because everybody has to learn. And especially when like this technology is always changing, it's new, it's kind of like expected. There's going to be people who are like, I haven't used this before. How do I use this? Because when I got on Invincible, that was the first show that I worked on that had like officially had like 3D assets that we were supposed to be using. I've worked on shows where people kind of like sneakily use some 3D stuff, but like this was the first time where they were like, you have to use it. So having people around you that you can reach out to and help was like very useful. Reach out to for help was very useful.
Yeah, and I also say too, like we do have resources at learn.toonboom.com and docs.toonboom.com that are really helpful if you're trying to figure out how to do something very specific in the program. Usually using a keyword like 3D will help you find out the various tools for either bringing in a 3D asset or flattening it in a specific shape so that you can use it in a 2D scene without it doing weird Z-depth things. Can be very useful. I wanted to ask you, what were the sort of, you mentioned that you were inspired by anime and by sort of comic book, um, sort of cartoons in like the 90s. What were your like touchstone series? What inspired you the most?
Oh, wait. I have one. I have two Trigun cells. So Trigun for sure was like a
Oh
huge,
yeah.
huge influence on me. Um, I mean the animes that I grew up, Naruto was like a big one. I grew up watching a lot of Naruto. I still have some of my sketchbooks from high school. It's like filled with drawings from Naruto, Inuyasha, Yu Yu Hakusho, Cowboy Bebop. Trying to think a lot of things. Outlaw Star was a big one. I love Outlaw Star. I feel like it's kind of like under people don't talk about it as much from that era, but like that was such a good series. I also really like the show Fushigi Yugi, which is like another one that like a lot of people don't really talk about anymore. But those were some of my favorites. And oh yeah, Fruits Baskets. I mean, I could name. It was just like the era of anime. I was all in on both shonen action and a lot of shoujo anime. And then like for action shows like from the West that I was watching, Batman Beyond was like my favorite show, X-Men Evolution, and the Batman animated series as well. But I like Batman. I don't know. I was a Batman Beyond girl like through and through. And then like the old Justice League, the Static Shock, and trying to think. I think that's pretty much it. Because I did watch some of the X-Men, like the X-Men 97 that's out now. I did watch some of that X-Men series and that Spider-Man series, but I don't remember what happened in them at all. So I know I watched them, but I'm like, I just remember them like fighting. I don't remember like the plot. So
like
I don't know.
25 years ago.
I know. I remember I was really into it. And oh yeah, and I was like before school, like I would watch like Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, and Sonic. Like that was like my morning routine for a while was getting up and watching those shows. So I think they've all kind of had like an impact on me. And I think, I think artists like Masashi Kishimoto, like Naruto and stuff, like I think he's had like a huge impact on my art style. And then later on, like with Avatar: Last Airbender, Legend of Korra, that like studio mirror style Voltron, like that started to affect me more as an adult because I was like, I want to make anime. I want to work on shows like this. So it definitely started to like impede into my like art style as I kept going along.
I think that's awesome. So we're almost out of time. Kaitrin, where can our audience go to see more of your work?
Yeah, I'm Kate Snod, KaitSnod on pretty much all social media. So you can find me across all of the platforms. I tend to be the most active on TikTok. But Instagram's also great. And then my website is just kaitrinsnodgrass.com if you guys want to like check it out as a reference for a portfolio. But yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Kaitrin, for taking us on a tour of your experiments with 3D Previs and Storyboard Pro. And thank you to our audience for joining us on this discussion. If you'd like to see more of what's new in Storyboard Pro, you can visit our website, toonboom.com, and download a 21-day trial of the latest release. Next week, we have back-to-back art streams on Tuesday and Wednesday with Marie-Eve Lasselle in Harmony and Mike Morris's Improv Storyboard Pro stream collaboratory, so you won't want to miss it. Thank you all for joining us, and be sure to tune in next time.